Good evening, Mayor and Council. June 13th Council briefing. We have a handful of items to go over with you tonight. We'll dive right into the first one regarding at-large seat vacancy. As was mentioned at the last council meeting, within the last couple of weeks, we have received letter of resignation of seat by Council Member Chet Stokes. He will be resigning his seat on November 7th. So part of the discussion tonight is to have the city attorney talk to you a little bit about her opinion of how we should move forward from a timing perspective, and then to have you all give us some direction as to what process you'd like to use going forward. And we have a little bit of information here to share with you as well about what's been done in the past with three specific vacancies that we've had in the past couple of decades. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sandy to talk a little bit about her thoughts as the attorney, and then I'll share with you what was done in '83, '98, and 2009.
Great, thanks, Mike. Members of council, Mayor Hoffman, as Mike indicated, my portion of the agenda tonight will address not only the timing of council's actions relative to filling the vacancy, but also the process by which it can undertake that activity. As stated earlier, Councilor Stokes submitted his resignation on June 1. He made it effective, however, midnight on November 7th. So relative to timing, while the council may begin to undertake discussions as to how it's going to fill that seat, it cannot fill the seat before November 7th, and specifically midnight November 7th, the effective time of the resignation. How you go about filling that seat can be determined if we have something already in place in terms of a rule or regulation or policy. My understanding from Mike is that there is not anything that's been codified in a rule, but more in the lines of a history or practice of this council filling those seats once they become vacant, and he will walk through what's happened in the past, at least on 3 different occasions. But the primary thing that I wanted to make sure that was clear based on questions that had been presented to me is that the vacancy cannot be filled prior to November 7th. And that means that we can't take action now making the filling or the appointment effective November 7th. It means that the act of actually appointing a successor cannot occur before that date. So are there any questions relative to that? And I ask that specifically because there were a number of other questions that have come up in the intervening days between the date of the date he submitted the letter of resignation and tonight's meeting. And so to the extent those questions need to be answered as well, I'm available to answer them to the extent I can.
Councilor Nichols.
So you're saying we just can't make the appointment? We can go through, if we decide we're going to do interviews, or we can go through a process to get somebody ready, but just not make the appointment until that time?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other hands raised from council. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Dumont.
Sorry, I was looking for my little hand guy there. I'm sure some of us have heard from a citizen who wanted to file for Chet's seat, which is not really vacant at the moment. Could we just have some clarity as to if the position cannot be filled until after November 7th, why it wouldn't be on the ballot, because it wouldn't be vacated. It would be vacated after the election. Just like if I'm not running again, my seat is, I'm still in it until November 8th, and other people are filing, or one person is filed to run for that seat. So I just need some clarity as to why it would be like in one case and not the other. Thank you.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding your question, the question is, why can't this individual run for Counselor Stokes' seat, even though it has not yet been vacated?
Correct, because my seat hasn't been vacated either, but they will both be vacant on after November 7th. So whenever the election's certified. So I'm just trying to understand the distinction between the two.
Right, and there is a distinction. So your term will expire, and by law, you will continue to hold that seat until your successor is elected and assumes office. And so there really isn't a vacation in the cleanest sense of the word. That's number one. But secondly, how we address an office being vacated is going to be governed by two sets of laws here, starting with our charter and then going to the Florida statutes. And they basically lay out what our options are for filling. And it can't be, I think the easiest way to say this is, you can't take that process that was articulated for filling a vacancy that's going to occur as it will with Counselor Stokes and then equating it to a term expiring where the seat would naturally be on the ballot. In addressing that question, there were three provisions that I looked to, and I'll read those to you and I identify them for anyone who's interested in tracking the actual language. The first provision is our city charter, section 23, chapter 3. And that provision says, word for word, should any vacancy occur in the council or in the office of the mayor other than by recall, by the recall provisions of the city charter, the city council shall elect a person to fill the vacant office until the next regular municipal election. Now, our charter does not define the next regular municipal election. Go to the Florida Election Code, and the Florida Election Code, chapter 97 through 106, is deemed to govern the conduct of a municipality's election in the absence of an applicable special act, charter, or ordinance provision. And it goes on to say the governing body may, by ordinance, change the dates for qualifying for the election of the members of the governing body and provide for orderly transitions of office resulting from such date of the changes. That's Florida Statutes 100.3605, subparagraphs 1 and 2. The Florida statutes, again, the Florida Code of Elections says, if such vacancies occur prior to the day set by law for qualifying for election to office at such general election, any person seeking nomination or election to, and I'm going to quote, put this in quote, the unexpired portion of the term shall qualify, end quote, shall qualify within the time period prescribed by law for the qualifying for the other offices to be filled by election at such general election. So those are the three overarching statutes, if you will, that's applying to this analysis. If the language of these statutes, I think, implicitly prohibits a vacancy being treated as something other than as they've set forth in these provisions. So they've said in again, Florida Statutes 100.111, that if the vacancy occurs prior to the first date of law for the qualifying period, that person seeking election can qualify and then be on the ballot. Here we don't have that. The vacancy is occurring on November 7, 2022. We cannot import the date we receive notice of that resignation with any degree of significance. It is the date that triggers the process. That statute clearly states if that vacancy occurs prior to the first day of the qualification period, that position can be filled by election. The first day of our qualifying period started today, June 13, 2022. It's clearly prior to the vacancy that we expect to occur. We cannot disregard the plain language of that statute and say, well, because we know, we can treat this vacancy as really sort of coming up now, so the qualification period can be met. It is expressly prohibited. And it's for that reason that we can't treat the vacancy as your term is going to be treated as expiring and then subject to election and qualification for November 8th. And that's primarily the reason and the rationale for that. Now, if the statute says that the qualification for election has to occur in a certain sequence, and that's not met by these facts, then that's all that's left available to us to utilize for filling that vacancy is the language of the charter, which is the city council will fill it and the successor will serve in that position until the next general election. And based on the language of the state code, the next general election for which a successor can qualify will be the general election for November 2024. So that is the analysis that I've utilized to come to that decision. I think that it's stated very clearly by the statute. The inferences are reasonable based on the stated or the express language. And I understand that there has been generated a copy of a 2010 Attorney General opinion that attempts to define the next regular election. I have 2 points on that, and the primary point is a general one. And that general point is this: an Attorney General opinion is advisory. The weight that's afforded to it by any court has always been dependent on the existence of other law that applies to the situation at hand. So if there's an absence of law, or if it's a question of first impression and there is nothing to look to for any specific guidance, the fact that an objective party, i.e. the AG, has weighed in on the issue carries some weight, but it's not controlling. It has no precedential value. It simply afforded some weight. And in this particular instance, we don't need to look to an Attorney General opinion, because although the statutes don't define the next general election, the statutes go through some degree of detail of telling you how to fill the vacancy. And the second part is this: that Attorney General opinion was expressly limited to how the term was used in Chapter 582 of the Florida statute. And for those of you who don't have the statute index available to you, Chapter 582 deals with the Soil and Water Conservation District. And so by its own language, it's not attempting to define that term more broadly than the issue that was presented to the Attorney General back in 2010. And for those reasons, while I understand that it might have had some value in 2010, I don't believe it has any value relative to resolving that issue today for us.
Thank you.
Councilor Jansen?
So when it comes to our charter, 23.3, where the text reads next regular general election, would it be redundant or beneficial to modify that to define something along the lines of the next election of the seat that was held by the person vacating said seat?
Well, I mean, I think it might be clear for purposes going forward, but remember, this is the charter, and so council's ability to simply change the language is fairly limited.
Sure, but I'm thinking future. I mean, this can very easily happen again.
But again, okay, so but that's a great point. So rather than changing the charter, what you would utilize are two other provisions to create council's own rule by way of an ordinance, which goes through and specifies how things will be defined for purposes of future election. So there is a state code, the Florida statute provision that I cited earlier specifically says the governing body of a municipality may by ordinance change the dates for qualifying and for the election of the members of body of the municipality. That provision could be used if you don't want to keep the same dates that we currently use. Alternatively, you could say, in the event there is a vacancy that occurs so many days prior to an already scheduled election, the qualifying period shall be, start here or there, count back from this. If we need only 60 days or 90 days, count back 90 days from the actual election day, and then you'd have a qualifying period under those certain circumstances. If you don't want to be that limited in your approach for future elections, you would utilize the language in the charter, which states, I believe it's section 16, chapter 3 of the charter, where the council is actually mandated to adopt such rules and regulations for the smooth conduct, and smooth is a word I'm throwing in there, but the efficient conduct of its elections. And so for these purposes, you can say, for the purposes of construing section 23 of the city charter, next regular municipal election shall mean, and then we can work from there. And you could even say it shall be the next one that's scheduled. I'm not really sure if at this point, although I'm saying this, that it won't be in conflict with that Florida code provision, but we'd have to check that, because the state statute says that the Florida election code really preempts anything that's done on the local government level if it's in conflict.
So as it stands right now, if someone were to file a lawsuit in reference to the way the code is written, the charter is written, we're still got good standing with state statute.
Yes, because again, there is an absence of a definition for next regular elections, because that's where the issue has been since almost June 1. The first set of questions really sort of resolved around council's authority to fill the seat, and then the next sort of wave of questions came into the issue: what's the next regular election? And with, of course, it coming, the scheduled election falling one day after the vacation becomes effective, that particular issue has kind of filled the room in the intervening period. But even though we don't have a definition for that, we do have instructions on how to fill a vacancy if it occurs prior to the qualifying period. The statute is clear. If it meets that standard, it's by election.
Yeah.
And so the reasonable inference here is, since it's not before the qualifying period, we have to fill it by appointment. And I would say that, in closing on this issue, the Supreme Court of Florida has addressed this in the cases that have more precisely dealt with the issue has been around the appointment of judges following the vacation of a seat on a bench somewhere. And at least one opinion that I've read, which has been generated since 2010, has tracked the analysis of the Florida statute that I have just cited, which is, depending on when the vacation occurs, if it's before, in the words of the Florida Supreme Court, before the election process, then that judicial vacancy is filled by an election rather than an appointment by the governor.
Okay.
Contrast that with the vacation occurring after the election process, which would be by appointment. And so while it's not an apples to apples comparison, what I take from that is some comfort in knowing that if this issue is litigated, it's going to be litigated to a court. And the judges are going to tap into their own experience looking at how it's been processed. And when that process is aligning with the statutes that are expressly written to apply to municipal elections, I think we stand a very good chance of winning. No lawyer's going to say it's a slam dunk, but clearly I would be more willing to say our analysis is grounded in the statute and should be successful than I'd be willing to say our analysis is grounded in an AGO, an attorney general opinion. And
Sure. So even if it was litigated, and I don't know if this is a question for you or Mike, we're going to move ahead forward with the process of an appointment anyways. And if it wants to be litigated, then it can be litigated through while somebody's seated as an appointment, correct?
yeah,
We wouldn't hold a vacancy due to a litigious situation.
No, I don't, and I don't think you have I think you have the obligation to fill the seat
Right.
by the language of the charter. It says you shall fill the vacancy. And so maybe the question comes the duration of that appointment, but not the act of actually making the appointment.
Okay, thank you.
So we made a decision that we're going to go by the charter, and the council's going to select. What are our options for selecting, and what were the three occurrences over the last couple decades? How were those handled?
Yeah, so Sandy, I'll jump in here and walk them through. The clerk's office did a little bit of research, and what we found is there were 3 vacancies where council needed to exercise its authority to fill those vacancies. That was replacement for Councilor Middleman in 2009, a vacancy in District 3, Seat 6 in 1998, and replacement of Bruce Corbett in 1983. In each of those instances, the council accepted nominations from its own body for candidates to replace or to fill the vacancy that was on council. In 2009 and 1998, neither of those processes had interviews or anything other than nominations followed by a vote. In 1983, while nominations were being made, there was a motion to defer in order to conduct interviews with candidates. That motion failed, and the council proceeded with nominations similar to how you've done board appointments in the past. And ultimately, whoever got the most votes was the one appointed to the council. With that being said, there is no defined process in place. This is merely the history of how this council has handled vacancies in the past. I think City Attorney Robinson would agree that whatever process this council chooses to put in place, as long as you shall fill the vacancy, as is called for in the charter, whatever process you define is what you define. So again, the one I'd probably put most emphasis on is the most recent, 2009. It was still 13 years ago, which is quite a ways. But in that instance, the council was asked to provide nominations for the vacancy. And ultimately, Mr. Matthews or Councilor Matthews was replaced for Middleman, the vacancy left by Middleman. So with that being said, it's certainly council's prerogative to identify what process you would like to use to fill such a vacancy. And with that, I see Councilor Golding has her hand raised. Councilor Golding.
So I do have some questions, and then I also have a comment. A question. I guess my question would be the process for filling the vacancy could be done in advance of November 7th, correct? So that come November 8th, whoever is chosen to fill the vacancy could then assume the seat. Is that correct?
I'll turn that over to City Attorney Robinson, but I think what she indicated previously was the council can do legwork. The question for the city attorney is, can they physically make the appointment and just not have it be effective until November 8th, or must the action of the appointment occur after November 7th midnight?
Yes, that's what I thought I communicated. So you can undertake all those activities that you deem necessary to make a good appointment prior to the appointment date, but the act of appointing must occur after the office has been vacated, not before.
And you cited, did you cite a statute that governs that?
Well, I'm using the plain language of the statute, and it's a vacancy. It's not vacant right now. It's vacant on November 7th. And so there is no language on which the council can rest its authority to act before that office is vacated. So if I was going to cite anything, I'd simply cite you back to the statute or the charter provision that gives you the authority to actually appoint.
Okay. And then Mike, I just have a comment, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but my initial thought based on what Mike said about what's been done in the past, and knowing how other cities have done it. I know Neptune Beach has held interviews for when they've replaced someone who has left office. And my thinking is this: if we interview candidates for board positions, I would think that it should be reasonable that we should interview candidates for the city council position. That's just my thought.
Councilor Dumont?
Thank you. So if we do all of this before the election, this is the council that will be finding who we'd want as the replacement. After the election, this is not the same council. I won't be here and two others may or may not be here. So I guess the question would be, when would the vote take place? Because it's the first election after certification. So if the first council meeting is if the first council meeting is after certification, then the first item of business is to swear in the new members. And then it's the new body that would be voting on the replacement.
I think I understand the question, and I'll rephrase this a little differently for the city attorney. Given the fact that the seat will not be vacated until November 7th at midnight, could council make the decision to hold a special meeting on Tuesday, November 8th, for the express purpose of appointing an individual to fill the vacancy left by Councilor Stokes?
You can't have a special meeting on the 8th because the council is a voting place.
You could have one on the 9th. Any day up in the intervening days between the 8th and the certification day. If you were concerned about having this full body absent, Mr. Stokes participate in that vote.
And then it could come down to a tie.
It could. And then somebody will have to just vote, propose another name. I mean, there is no process. So theoretically, any of you can throw out names and you can vote on them in whatever order you deem appropriate. And the first one who has enough votes wins, I guess.
Well, then if it is going to be this council that's going to select the new council member, I would suggest that we have time. We've got a lot of time between now and then. We might want to find out who in the community is interested. So instead of us just picking people, who is interested in actually serving on city council for 2 years? And then we can go through that and then make the nominations based off of that information. I haven't heard anybody suggest, we might want to ask our residents if they're interested in fulfilling the rest of Mr. Stokes's term.
Counselor Nichols?
Will we have the opportunity to potentially limit the pool to say people that are currently on boards? Because we've interviewed a lot of those in the past and they've already shown the desire to work with the city.
If that's the process council decides to use, that could certainly be the process.
Can I follow up with that real quick? I like that idea, but my concern is then they get booted off the board and they're not guaranteed a spot back on the board after, like, I'm thinking the planning commission, it takes a long time to get up to speed where they then would have to go off board. And in the meantime, somebody would have been appointed. So that would be my only concern with that. But I like thinking of those who've already shown dedication to the city.
Counselor Golding?
I personally don't think that we limit ourselves to those that are on boards. I just don't think that's, I don't think that's not preferred in my opinion, but it seems to me that we need to come up with a process. I mean, it seems like this is just made it very obvious that we really need to have a process. And so is that something that we can work on? Is that something we need to put, as a future briefing topic, or what do we need to do there? Because I really think that we need to talk further about that process and we need to get it nailed down.
Is it for this particular appointment or for all future appointments?
For all future, for this one, I mean, it would be great if it could address this one, but for all future appointments, because I think we need to have something in place.
Counselor Nichols?
Obviously, in the past, like you said, they've just selected somebody. The council's nominated and selected somebody. I'm not opposed to, doing some interviews or something. I'm a little concerned about setting something now that would determine how this is done indefinitely, because I think it's the way it's written in the charter. It says that the council shall select, and I think each council should determine the process they want to utilize to replace that. And I think future councils may think differently than we do. So I'm open to coming up with a process for this time, but not. I have a concern about changing it indefinitely.
Mayor Hoffman?
I agree with that. I think we need to take this one on a case-by-case basis. So we do need something for this time, but I don't think we want to, I think the charter keeps it vague for a reason. And I think it should be up to future councils to handle each time. It's obviously, fortunately, something that doesn't come up frequently for us, unlike some other cities nearby. But it does sound like we're all kind of on the same page as far as doing the legwork prior to November. So we do have some time. So, I would offer that maybe we take, put a little bit of a timeline together, as well as modify the board application, just so that we have some background information on people, and then have maybe not necessarily public board interviews like we do with the boards, but give the opportunity for people to meet one-on-one, because I think some applicants will be more well-known to some of us than others. So I'm happy to volunteer to work with maybe Sandy and Mike and the clerk's office to put put a draft process together and revisit at a briefing in the near future. Because as Ms. Dumont pointed out, we do have some time to get it figured out. And then, so that's just my comment. My question is on the far distant off chance that Mr. Stokes not prevail in his election, would he be eligible to be one of those potential appointees back to the seat? Oh, you're muted, Sandy.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
he
you.
is.
Council like the idea of the city manager, city attorney, and the mayor putting together an outline of what a process and timeline would look like for this particular replacement? Seeing heads nod and thumbs up. Okay, we will begin working on that and get something back to you in short order. With that, we're ready to move on to number 2 on our agenda for this evening, which is talking about the right-of-way vacation request. I'm going to turn it over to Planning Director Ireland, who will just give a brief intro, and then we'll see if council has any questions for staff.
Great, thank you, Mike. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I don't have a ton of new information to share, but I'll just kind of recap for you guys. Last month, the council considered and adopted a resolution to move to the next step with a request for a vacation of right-of-way on 2nd Avenue North and 1st Avenue North. And the request is in support of a project for a 38 unit townhouse development. I kept the memo pretty brief. At the May 16th meeting, several of you indicated that you wanted to discuss it further before the ordinance was considered. I know you've already received a copy of the application from May. So what I provided for you along with the memo was simply the boundary survey showing cleanly what areas the applicant is requesting to have the city vacate. And then Councilman Nichols requested some information on past requests of this nature. So I've provided you with a spreadsheet that I went through our permitting software and pulled requests for this type of application from 1996 till the most recent one, which was 2016, and just provided you with a little bit of information on each one of those requests. But nothing new from me, myself, and also representatives from Public Works and Beaches Energy are here if you have any questions.
Councilor
Yes,
Neal?
my question for each one of those is just, what's the terminology for the greater public purpose or something? What is the terminology we're using?
So in the resolution, I think you're referring to resolution 151496, which established that there will be a process for this. And it's in your memo at the bottom of page 1, that pursuant to that resolution, there must be an overwhelming public purpose that will be served if the right-of-way or easement is turned over to a private owner.
And
I
what
think
was it?
that's
What
what
was
you're
it?
looking
Yes,
for.
correct. What was the date of that memo?
This is our memo for this meeting, but I'm referencing
Oh.
for a 1996 resolution that established that there'll be a process for this.
Okay, I would be interested in knowing what the overwhelming public benefit are to each of these that have been, that we've given the right of way in the past, to know what we're comparing to today. Because it's easy to say there's no public benefit, but if we have shown overwhelming public benefit in the past is very little, if no public benefit, then my concern is deviation from that might be open a can of worms for us.
Yeah, and to go into a little bit more detail on that, there is no definition of what that overwhelming public benefit or public purpose is. I think that's for council to decide. We don't have a definition that says it needs to be X amount of tax dollars created for the city, or it needs to provide A, B, and C.
Absolutely. That's why I'm interested in what was done in the past.
Yeah.
And then also, my whole the reason that I wanted this to move forward is I have a major concern with the possibility of 57 apartment units on that block. And I know people are saying, no, that they can't do that. Telling you, it can be done. A site plan can be developed to do that. And also my concern is the way the market has shifted, it is probably in their financial best interest to pursue apartments as opposed to townhomes. So that's the reason I want to continue to have this discussion to see really what our options are. I'm just, and I don't know what they would even, I mean, Heather, what would they have to do if they put whatever the 50 something apartments there and followed the setbacks or whatever? I mean, is there anything that could be done to stop that at this point if it's zoned for that use?
So the 55 or 57, I can't remember the number of, that would be the max density that would be permitted on that property based on its land use and location. I haven't seen a site plan that actually shows that many units that meets all the other requirements. So, you know, I can't say for certainty that they actually can meet all the requirements, parking, landscaping, buffers, unit size, that sort of thing, under the current land use and zoning. It may be possible, but
I'm saying if it is possible and without having to ask for rezone anything, is there, I mean, they could do that pretty easily, right?
Yeah, I mean, the major constraints on a project like that would be the provision of parking and the other required landscaping. But yes, as far as density goes, their maximum would be whatever it is. I think it's 55 or 57.
Yeah.
40 units an acre. So whatever that shakes out to be.
Yep. And I don't think that's a good fit for the area. That's why I want to continue to have this conversation.
Counselor Jansen.
I'm just to piggyback off of what Counselor Nichols said, looking at this list, I looked at it earlier. And when I see things like when we use the term overwhelming public interest, and I see one in 1998 where pool installation at existing single family home. I'm not sure where the overwhelming public interest is in that in their pool, but, and not to beat the dead horse, but when I look at all the things that's being provided to the city, kind of, you know, the parking, the public parking, alleviating traffic with interior drives, 19 less units to reduce density, alleviating gas line electric conflict where they're out of code with each other and they're paying for that, and the redevelopment of the First Avenue and 11th, First Avenue and 11th Street intersection on their dime as well, and with the fact that they're willing to keep all that right of way green space, that there's no structures going to be built on it, that's still going to be accessible with sidewalks and what have you, that there's plenty of public interest in comparison, at least to what I'm seeing on the list that was provided to me.
Counselor Golding.
Heather, can you help me understand this? Because I think it's important that we compare apples to apples. And, you know, I'm looking at the right-of-way street type as being the type that would be apples to apples with what's currently being requested. If we look at that in the table that you shared with us, is that ultimately the same thing?
Yes, ma'am, it is. And most of the examples that are in this table, they were basically dead end streets that had no utilities and we're not going to go through anywhere. They ended at, you know, the golf course, for example. And then the remainder of them are alleyways. Most of them were mid-block, east-west, a couple north-south. But yes, the comparable comparison were those street right-of-ways.
So to Mr. Jansen's point about the pool, that really is not that's not one that we would use as a comparison then, because that is a easement. Okay,
Yeah, that's correct. I just wanted to give you guys the full breadth of the applications that I found. So you could see all the different reasons that this was applied for.
okay. And then to the point of about parking and what could be built there, I know that I've sat in on meetings where there have been proposals for development, and there's very specific things that are required for parking. So in order to be able to put 57 units or 55, whatever they are, without going through any other process like PUD or anything like that, to just whatever their right is according to our current land development code, what would have to happen as far as parking? What would they have to provide in the way of parking without having to go through Board of Adjustment or anything?
So just like any other residential project, it's 2 parking spaces per unit for whether it's townhouse, single family, or apartment. So the parking requirement for residential uses is the same in that regard. But there's also requirements for setbacks from the roadway and the corners, internal landscaping. So again, it depends how they laid out their project, whether it was one building, several buildings. So it's kind of hard to say. I can tell you what the requirement is and what the general requirements are, such as number of parking spaces and setbacks. But without seeing something, it's really hard to kind of comment on details.
And all the parking has to be provided on site as well, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then they have to be able to turn around, and it seems like that was a discussion point with another property that was being discussed several years ago. Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilor Stokes?
Thanks. My question is on the Beaches Energy Services internal policy, and that why we cannot address that aspect of this instead of vacating the right of way. Can we make an exception to the policy and save the vacation of the right of way? The city can keep the right of way, and they can put their utility easement in that 10-foot section. To me, that seems like a win-win-win type situation. We get to keep the right of way, the utilities go in, and everybody is happy. So that's my question. And I haven't gotten an answer to that one yet.
Do we have Director Putnam on the phone tonight? I know he was traveling today. I'm not sure.
No, Mike. Lamar, I'm here.
Lamar, do you want to take a stab at answering that, or do you want me to take it?
Well, past practice, we put all the utilities that feed the development inside their property without going out into the right of way, other than the feed going in.
Yes, Chet, to answer your question a little more succinctly, if we make an exception on one project, there will be demand to make exceptions on future projects. So either Beaches Energy would need to holistically change their internal policy and practice, or the applicant should be required to comply with it just like everybody else. Because once you do it for one, then the next, regardless of the project, is going to say, my expectation is that if you do it for them, you'll do it for me as well. I know that the process or the practice that we have is not necessarily what other communities around us might do, in particular like JEA. But with that being said, that's something that the city of Jacksonville Beach and Beaches Energy has done for a long time, a number of years, and it's fairly consistent throughout the community. So for that reason, I would not like to see Beaches Energy make an exception. If at some point we want to discuss a change in our policy, our internal policy and our practice in Beaches Energy we can do so. But we'd also need to understand what that means when we start talking about urban properties, where if we're going to start taking up right of way to put our infrastructure, that's going to start chewing into our right of way very quickly.
All right, I appreciate that answer. Me personally, I'd rather vote for an exception to the policy than vacating the right of way, but I understand, why. And just, as a homeowner with, right of way, and when AT&T put fiber in our neighborhood, they put a nice big box in the middle of my yard, and I had no way to fight it because it's the right of way. Now I can ask AT&T to maybe move it to the in between the yards, but that's a big process, and I'm working on that with AT&T. But to me, it seems like as a homeowner, we're kind of we helped AT&T put this box in my yard, but we're not helping, interested in putting our own Beaches Energy services in the right of way that we own. So it just kind of doesn't match up to me as somebody, that's got a right of way in my front yard.
Can I talk on that, Mike?
Sure can.
Where we convert overhead to underground and you put a transformer has to go somewhere. It's going to go typically where the overhead transformer was. And people don't like that. But overall, that's the best for the city and the community in that area, in my opinion.
Councilor Dumont.
Thank you. And thank you, Lamar, for noting something that I think is not being discussed right now. Is one of our long-term plans is to get all wires underground, and we need our right of ways. If we go back to the city policy on overwhelming public purpose, I like that Sandy brought up that these are not apple to apple things. So the cube storage, it was the alley in the middle of the block. It wasn't the right of ways on the ends of the block. So that's concerning to me. I appreciate Corey's concern about apartments and density, but then if we do not see an overwhelming public value for giving them the right of way, then they have to do fewer than 38 townhouses, because they're still going to make more of townhouses than they are off of apartments. And so I have a concern on that part as well. And so those are two large pieces. And then one is just the terminology that we're using. 10 feet of right of way on each side. And that doesn't sound like a lot of land, but it is. When you start looking at square footage, it's the square footage of a small residential property that we would be giving to a private developer. There's value to that. And especially if you start thinking about that value in regard to needing to get all our lines underground to protect the people who already live there during hurricanes, to make sure that our electric infrastructure can hold up in storms. I don't see what public value we as a city would get by giving away our land.
My other question to that point is, if the developer is going to utilize that land, they are not building anything on it. The city will still have full access to that land as well. There's just going to be utilities on it. I mean, it's not like they're going to build a house on it and we're not going to be able to put utilities on it. I mean, we're still going to be able to maintain Beaches Energy utilities. They're going to give an easement right back to the city for the property.
I guess my question, if I may, is what is the public value?
I'm sorry?
what is the overwhelming public value?
I guess there's additional parking. That's for us to decide what is the overwhelming public value. A public value, I mean, what are all the overwhelming public values and all the other ones? There's pretty much the city so far has had no value given to them for anything like this in the past. But my other concern, back to the apartments, does anybody know how many apartments are in the building that's on the corner of 9th Avenue South and 2nd Street that has the parking underneath? Because that's a quarter of a block. Heather, do you happen to know how many apartments are in that building? It's 3-story blue. And my concern is that's what we're going to end up with. We're going to end up with 114 parking spaces on the first floor underneath. They've got to put some green area in, but we're going to end up with a box that looks like that. And that's what I'm afraid of over a whole block.
Mayor Hoffman?
Thank you. Ms. Ireland, I'm just kind of technical question. As far as if the right-of-way abandonment is approved, what is that attached to? Because obviously the PUD hasn't gone up for approval yet. So does that attach to the land? Is it only for that owner? If they change their project, would they still have that right?
So the way that the ordinance is being drafted is basically that it would be contingent on the approval of the PUD. So it would really be tied to that project. At least that would be our preference and how to put that together. But once it's vacated, it's vacated.
Yeah,
Contingent on the PUD though. Okay.
That's the way we would draft it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
We would draft it contingent on the adoption of a PUD for the project, and also have it be tethered to the dedication of an easement back to the city. Both of those two conditions would be required for the right of way to be vacated.
Correct. And Heather, I guess my other question is, would this, if they have an easement back to the city, would it impact the city's ability to use that property for utilities?
That's a question I would defer to either Beaches Energy or Public Works for that. But to answer your previous question, Councilman Nichols, I think I have the right property for those apartments you referenced, and I think it's 22 units.
Okay, and that's on a quarter of a block.
A little bit more, yeah.
Maybe a third of a block. So that's why my concern is it could be pretty easy for them to get to 57.
We do have Public Works Director on the line, who I think was going to address the issue of using that property for utilities going forward.
Thank you.
So one of the things to be concerned, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I just jumped on. One of the things to be concerned with is not only are we going to need one easement for this property, but we're going to need multiple easements for this property. And the reasoning is while it's being an easement given to Beaches Energy for the placement of underground facilities, it's also going to need an easement for city maintenance of the sidewalk on both ends of those streets. And then so that's something that I guess I hadn't really thought about it until now, was we got to work with Beaches Energy to even see whether they're okay with concrete being on top of their easement. That's going to create a maintenance issue. If they ever have to do any maintenance on any of these lines that get buried in there, they would all be directly underneath the sidewalk. The other thing is the standard practice is that is a 10-foot Beaches Energy easement only, which means if Beaches Energy chose maybe to allow gas to go in, since that's another Beaches Energy infrastructure, I don't know that Beaches Energy could then allow the easement document, probably will not allow the other public works utilities to go under that easement.
But couldn't we create an easement, a full easement for the city to have every aspect of the city and Beaches Energy to have access to that? Is it just the verbiage of it instead of multiple easements to have just a full easement?
I think the answer to your question is a valid one, Counselor Nichols. The purpose for the request of the vacation is specifically to meet the beach's energy need, but there's no reason why the ordinance could not be crafted in such a way that it is a general utility easement dedicated to the city. Therefore, filling beaches energy, and if at some point in time it's not needed by beaches energy, it could be used by Public Works or for any other utility purpose needed by the city. So since we are going to be wrapping up the ordinance and bringing it back to council for consideration in short order, that's some of the language that we can make sure we put into the ordinance itself.
Correct. And how much additional easement will be out there? I mean, they're not taking, there's 35 feet, 30 feet? How much, I mean, sorry, not easement, but how much right of way is out there from the edge of pavement for areas to put utilities? I mean, they all wouldn't go into this 10-foot easement, right?
So the 10-foot on the north end of the property, there is a significant amount, obviously, because that's where they're planning to put all the parking and whatnot. So there is a significant easement accounting or right of way counting both sides of the road. One of the points to consider yourself with is look at the south end of that property. The south end of that southwest corner of that property, that easement is, or that whole vacation of right of way is going to put the corner of their property within about 2 foot of the edge of pavement, which means there's going to be very, very little room for anything on the west side of the property, as well as at least in the very southwest corner of that property to travel through there without being under the roadway.
Thank you.
Also, what I would like to interject that they're talking about stacking the utilities because you're moving everybody out. And when you start doing that, and it's going to be under a parking lot on 2nd Avenue, that creates a lot of problems with maintenance and repair if something fails.
Councilor,
I would concur with that statement as well with what Lamar just said.
Councilor Dumont?
Thank you. I'm obviously not in favor of this. There are other people on council are. I'm going to bring up, just because I always bring it up and I can't believe I haven't mentioned this. It's all about the fee simple properties. And if something happens to one in the middle, it decreases the value for all of them because the people on the side can't make the middle guy change the roof. But this is obviously, looks like it's going to move forward as an ordinance. Can I request that we have detailed reasons why planning, Beaches Energy, and Public Works are against this idea? Because they are the experts, we're not the experts. They are the experts, they understand how all that stuff that we have in the city, they've worked with it for years. So I would like a detailed explanation laid out what the safety issues could be, what the long-term consequences could be for each one of those areas before so the public can clearly know what council is voting for or against.
When we bring the ordinance forward to council, it'll have the terms and conditions for the vacation. At this point in time, Beaches Energy and Public Works have already weighed in with regards to the requirements of the application process. What I don't want to have them do is start weighing in outside of the application process, because you may start getting into some subjectivity of preferences for department directors or their perceived issues. And I don't want our staff to get into the middle of this with regards to their perceptions of how things should be done going forward. At this point in time, the determination is really one of council's. Do you feel there is a benefit to vacate the right of way, or do you not feel there is a benefit to vacate the right of way?
Correct, and I agree with that. And I don't want to put
Yeah.
staff in a policy position. However, they noted that they recommend rejection of this idea. So a clear listing of why, because I know Director Putnam wasn't able to be there to explain why he was against it. And Director Barron was, he was there, but he was also presented with more information at that meeting that he didn't have beforehand. And yes, that didn't deal with the application and what he based it on, but I think that that would help. But my goal is that the council as well as citizens have a full understanding of what is being asked for.
Well, and without getting into too much detail, the sequence of events is what's really the monkey wrench in all of this. The applicant is requesting a vacation of right-of-way based on a project that they are proposing to do. They have not yet received approval on their site plan or their PUD for the project. So our staff would be weighing in on the possible implications of a site plan and the design as it's currently laid out. And the reality is that the site plan and the design might change between now and the final PUD. So to start getting into the issue of, is there concrete over the top of the utilities? What about paved parking spaces? Where is the power line specifically going to be located? All of that really becomes ancillary because the design is not yet locked in and finalized. So if staff starts weighing in with their perspectives, you're basically negotiating the site plan from the dais. And I'm not sure if that's the position that council wants to be in. Either we can live with less right-of-way on this corridor and vacate it and get an easement back for the development, or council doesn't want to vacate the right-of-way. But the reality is that we're working off of a site plan that, Director Ireland, how many different versions of the site plan has your department seen so far? 6?
That sounds about right. It has changed over the last few months here and there.
It's changed several times, and there's a possibility it may change again. You know, a vacation of right-of-way usually doesn't get into this level of, you know, where is the water line specifically going to be located?
So I have a basic question, it's a process question. If they have to demonstrate that they can provide an overwhelming public value if they're granted this right of way, but we can't base our decision as to whether they give them the right of way on anything other than them asking for it, I don't understand how we can say that there would be a public value to it.
And again, that's for council to determine whether or not the project in its totality is a public purpose, or whether any individual item that they've included constitutes a public purpose. But that's for council from a policy decision. I would just hate to get our directors involved in weighing in with specifics on a conceptual design that has not yet been approved, and basically start negotiating the overall design of the project at this point. That's typically not what happens with a vacation of right-of-way. My 2 cents. Or as someone said, with inflation, it's my 4 cents. Councilor Stokes?
This is one thing we'll miss when we go back to in person. We'll get to see this little guy. But question is, why we just admitted that when they get the PUD, the plans could change. Why are we vacating the right of way before the final PUD change? Why does that vote come first? I guess that's another technical question, because by the time it gets through the final PUD changes, we may not need, they may not need 10 feet because it still has to go through planning. So I guess that's a quick technical.
Director Ireland, you want to take that one?
I think in this case, they've designed so much of the site in advance of what we would normally see at this stage. You're right. The vacation would normally be upfront in the beginning of the project without them having gone so far into design. So it was a little bit not off process, if you will, but we do have an application for PUD in-house. We just haven't processed it because they technically don't own all the property they need for us to be able to process it. So that's why the vacation of right-of-way ordinance final approval would be contingent upon the PUD being approved. Another thing that we haven't done yet with them as part of the PUD application process is a pre-application meeting, where that's where we really would get down into some of the nitty-gritty that could potentially change the site plan in some specific areas. But since we haven't gotten to that point in the process yet, we don't know what, if anything, might change about their site plan. It might be small modifications, but it might be something large like a transformer location, for example. And I know the applicant has been meeting with different department representatives along the way individually to try to hash out some of these issues in advance as they prepare to go through the PUD process. So I don't know if that helps.
It does. It clears it up. And just so after hearing from Director Barron, I still think that, the coming up with a policy exception is a better route than having to vacate the right of way. It just makes more sense in my mind based on the issues presented.
Not seeing any more hands with questions on this topic. Are we ready to move on to item 3 for this evening? Okay, we'll move on to the Veterans Memorial. With that, I will turn it over to Parks and Rec. We have Trevor Hughes, who's going to talk a little bit about future expansion of the Veterans Memorial. All yours, Trevor.
Hey, good evening. 2020, we relocated the Veterans Memorial from the corner of 2nd Street and Beach Boulevard to its now location, Oceanfront Park. And it's been well received, and it's been a huge upgrade from where it was. We're very proud of that project. Here recently this spring, the American Legion has come offering to add some additional monuments to it. When we designed it originally, we left space to add kind of 3 more matching, I call them wedges, to go there, little memorials that we could add for future expansion. They came and they asked if they could add one specifically talking for the Korean War, one for the Vietnam War, and then one was an American Legion's Act, which was to cover all the other kind of anyone else that died in any other wartime event. So we took that into consideration. I reached out to another local veteran group. This other local veteran group kind of had a different opinion of what they thought the memorial should expand. One thing that I would like to point out is the memorial started as a World War II memorial. It started as a wall listing names honoring those that lived at the beach that gave their lives. Some local beach historians have done an amazing job, and they've actually came up with a list of all wartime, veterans that gave their lives. So really what I'd like to come is one, is the council willing to allow us to make changes? And then 2, how do we go about deciding the changes that need to be made? We have one group that comes up, they want us to make these certain plaques. To me, the wedges that they're bringing, it kind of fills up our space. It doesn't allow for some future growth. So really what I'm asking is we need to sort of define that space. What do we want it to be? Do we want to kind of build a wall and have our own wall and list names of all the different wars and all the different things? Or do we simply add these wedges and allow it to be what it is?
Councilor Meza.
Like wedges or the walls, I could go either way. But if I was to choose, I would probably go with the wall. I think the wall has, we have,
Fernando,
the
your connection's bad.
wall gives us the ability to
Fernando, you're,
add more names, and I do agree that adding the Queen and getting Ward 2 or Veterans Memorial Wall here is a good idea.
Sorry, Mike, it's not letting me mute or anything.
no,
Is it-
I think we got to wait until it ends. Fernando, your video and audio kind of jumped up on you. So let's jump over to Mayor Hoffman.
I agree with everything Fernando said. Just kidding.
Okay.
First I want to say that I really do like the new location. I advocated for this park to be moved to the Beaches Museum, but it was done very, very well. It's beautiful. I've been to a few, most recently the SS Gulf America Memorial event, and it's lovely. So I haven't seen it at sunrise as Trevor obviously has, but it is a really beautiful location. So thank you for the care and work you put into that. I won't mention the prior site because it's not looking as great, but hopefully we'll have a plan for that soon. So I would support the wedges with the listing of the wars. And the reason why is because I think when you get into listing people, it's very easy, even with the historian work that has gone on, to leave people out. I do think that we have the street sign program for locals that were lost in those wars. And I think that's a really wonderful program that's been very well taken advantage of. I also think that our community has a lot of military retirees that served in each of those wars as well, that, you know, may have lived here or been from here, but maybe would not end up on that memorial. So I support the wedges, and I do support adding those to the park because I think that's the World War II and the Gulf of America was a World War II related incident. Shouldn't be the only thing that we memorialize. Work on it, Trevor.
Councilor Dumont.
Thank you. I'm okay with the wedges. My concern is there are more wars that haven't been mentioned. There's the Gulf War, the Afghanistan War. I mean, so we're going to run out of wedge room. And then if we just do a wall with a whole bunch of names, you're still going to run out of room. At least the wedges are low to the ground and you can still enjoy the scenery. So I'm hoping we don't have to ever do this to take out some of those benches to fit more wedges. But we're already 2, 3, if you include now, 3 wars behind on wedge placement.
Councilor Golding.
Yeah, that was my concern too, that, you know, that there are other wars that, you know, we're not taking into account if we put these wedges in there. So yeah. Yeah, I'm just concerned about what we do going forward.
Councilor Jansen.
I have to concur with the mayor that we've got the space to add these additional ones. And if we start heading down the road where we have more wars that we need to add, then maybe we can look at a modified design for the wedge itself. Maybe adding 2 wars per wedge or something like that. Just a new look and replace the wedges as needed or as see fit. We have a little bit of a little space right now, so let's add them and then, you know, address it again in the future if we need to add wars.
Councilor Jansen. Oh, there you go. Councilor Stokes.
My thought is somewhere in the middle. I would like to see a enhancement and enlargement of our existing memorial. This is a veteran-rich community. Unfortunately, some of those veterans lost their lives serving their country, and we should, have a very meaningful memorial honoring them. Maybe my thought is that we have a larger memorial, potential monument wall, but maybe leave the names off to just add the wars, and maybe keep the one that we have, but not necessarily add names from Vietnam, Korea, etc. But put the memorials, and that might save space, and then also allow us to add the additional conflicts and wars on there. So where it's, we don't have to honor all the individual names, but honor all of the conflicts, and a tribute to all those who lost their lives without specific mention throughout all the wars.
Councilor Golding?
Trevor, going back to a comment you made, you said that there was another group that you spoke with, and it sounded like they had some different thoughts. Is that true? And if so, can you share with us?
Yeah, another group that I'd spoken to, they were really in favor of listing the names. What I envision is you kind of have, your traditional black walls that you'd see at some of the other memorials, maybe a laser etched, where if you do leave someone's name off, it's easy to come back and add those names. Possibly some low walls right behind the existing wedges, and you come in, you can list each war, you could list the names. Just really something that would be timeless, something that we could grow. No one's mentioned it, but the Space Force, are they part of our own forces? How long before we need a Space Force one, or just whatever else that may come. Ultimately, I'd love something that we can continue to expand and grow, and just have something the community could be proud of and appreciate. I'd hate to have a square just full of wedges all the way around it. But I'm willing to do whatever, the community desires, how we'd honor, those that have passed.
And then you said that there were some historians that had done some work. Do we know how many people they have identified that were killed in wars that, have over the years, besides World War II?
That would be my next step. If we wanted to do something that was a little different than what had already been offered, I would reach out to these groups. We would come up, get the number of names, and have something sketched out, drawn out. And the American Legion wasn't. They said that they would be willing to support any of the additions that we've had. They weren't only wanting to support. It wasn't like wedge or nothing. That is something that they had come up with. And so that would kind of be the next steps, where would we like to see it? How do we want to honor it? What I also would hate is now all of a sudden the VFW calls me up and said, hey, you didn't get my input, or hey, you didn't get this. So I really wanted for us to define the memorial. What do we want the memorial to be? And then we can allow, some of these other groups to grow and expand and help build what the community ultimately wants.
Well, then my thinking is that I think we need to get some more information before we decide on how we would want it to be designed. I mean, I'd like to have a better understanding of, at this point, how many names would we, if we were going to do names, I mean, at least it's something for us to consider. And if it's a lot, then maybe that helps us decide that, okay, maybe that's not the direction we go in, or whatever the case may be. But I'm kind of wondering if we shouldn't get some more information before we move forward with this particular request.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, how do y'all feel about Parks and Rec doing some outreach with other veterans groups or military affiliated groups, and then coming back with a concept of what the expansion would look like based on that community feedback? Seeing heads nod, Trevor.
Okay, awesome.
Mayor Hoffman?
Can I just make one more comment? Since the fact that we have not added a memorial more recently than the World War II, like talking about Space Force. I'm like, let's take it one thing at a time. Because I think we're doing well to get into modern times, but also just something to think about. It popped into my head when we think about listing names. Some of the people who have in our community who have died in more recent conflicts have not been service members, but they have been serving our country in contractor roles. So I think that's something that I think will come up. So when we get to listing names, we open a can of worms there. And I just want to make sure we think through all of those eventualities, because I can think of at least one that I think the community would be upset if they were not listed on there, but they were not necessarily a service member at the time of their passing.
So Trevor, you got your direction on this one? Get a
Yes,
little
sir.
input, and then we'll come back with a revised concept for them to look at.
Thank you. We will do it. We'll get back soon.
Do any council members have any of their programs that they want to report out on that they are currently responsible for? Councilor Stokes, must be Blue Zones.
It's the last Blue Zones report you'll ever get from me, unfortunately. The beaches, and unfortunately, I didn't find out from Blue Zones, kind of upset about that, sorry, but found out through somebody else that the beaches weren't chosen to be part of the Blue Zones project. So that's unfortunate, but we are still doing lots of things that fit in the Blue Zones lifestyle: healthy eating, outdoors, the urban trails project, the complete streets projects. All those kind of things fit right up that alley. So let's charge forward on our own, and maybe they'll come back at a later date.
Thank you. Councilor Golding.
I just wanted to mention that the League of Cities has opened up applications for the policy committees for the coming legislative session. I have applied to serve on the Municipal Administration Policy Committee again, and would just encourage my fellow council members to consider applying to a committee as well. I think since Mr. Stokes he may not be serving on a committee, so if somebody could serve on the committee he was serving on, that would be really good, but encourage you to look into that.
All right, Councilor Jansen.
Just briefly, we had our pension meeting on Tuesday. The numbers look really good. It was based on the first quarter of 22, if I'm not mistaken. The percentages of funded are really good. I won't get into specific numbers. However, we were kind of cautioned about looking into the future based on the downward trend of our economy. It might not be as well moving forward, although we're doing very, very good overall as our pension. We're very healthy and we're in a good position. And we welcome new members as well. So they got a full meeting in front of them as their first meeting. They did a really good job.
Thank you. Jumping into the last topic, the only thing that I'd like to throw out to council is I know you've had a couple of presentations by residents about adopting a balloon ordinance. Is that something you'd like to discuss about at a briefing, or do you want staff to just go ahead and prepare something for your consideration?
I didn't hear what you said, Micah. What ordinance?
Oh, the balloon release ordinance. We've already got copies of what has been adopted in Atlantic, Neptune, and St. Johns County. I know that Sandy Robinson's plate's a little full right now, but when she gets around to it, we could certainly bring an ordinance that's similar, if not the same, back to council for your consideration. Thoughts on that? I see thumbs up and heads nodding. Okay, good.
Yeah, I don't think we need to do a full briefing on it, because we have so many ordinances out there that are very similar. So we might be able to just, get through the ordinance in at the first reading, make any adjustments for the second, instead of wasting briefing time.
That was my thought, and I know that I've spoken with a handful of you that the only concern that I really have with adopting an ordinance like that is making sure we're on the same page with how the police department would enforce such an ordinance. The last thing we want to do is get international attention by arresting a 75 or an octogenarian who was celebrating the passing of their spouse because they accidentally released a balloon, and now we have them in cuffs, dragging them off of the beach. I know that that's actually happened in some other communities with handing out sandwiches in parks, and that's never good from a press perspective. So I think if we can get through just an understanding of how we would handle the education component, let alone the enforcement, I think we would be in pretty good shape, and we can bring that right back to you for consideration. Any other thoughts on future briefing topics? Councilor Jansen.
I don't know if it'd fall under a briefing topic or not, but conversation about how briefings are held moving forward as the governor's bill ended, as a reference to having them via Zoom.
I'll get with the city attorney on that one.
Wasn't that addressed in today's email? We're face to face after this month. No more Zoom. Zoom.
Sandy, is that something you want to talk about now, or do we want to bring together and send it out?
Can the council choose to continue the briefings via Zoom? I know that there was, can't we make that decision?
No, sir. Based on our research, the answer to that is no. However, you can utilize the format that's provided to you now for remote participation, i.e.,
If it's an emergency.
as long as 4 people are present,
Okay.
then you are permitted so many times a year to participate from a remote location.
Thank you.
Mayor Hoffman.
And I'm talking about further away, well past 4th of July, all these June events. It would be great to get a little update from Parks and Rec on where we are with Gonzalez Park, as well as revising the special event policy.
I would definitely agree with the special events, and I don't really want to get into it now, but when there's time and there's some direction moving forward with the pier and management and stuff, an update on that would be nice.
Okay. Seeing no other hands raised, that will conclude our briefing for tonight. Everybody have a great rest of the day. And if you need anything, give up. Good night.
Thanks, Mike.